Okay, guys, so I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of internet gaming disorder or video game addiction, because it really has not only gained a lot of attention in research and clinical circles, but as we will get to at a later point in time, there have been some policies. I'm going to talk about it in more detail next class, but I'll kind of introduce it at the end of this class. There have been some policies that are really controversial that different countries have instituted surrounding trying to curb video game online play because of the fear that it will turn into an addiction. So that's why I want to focus specifically on internet gaming and video game addiction now. Okay, so let's get this going a little bit further. If you look at slides, by the way, this video is going to cover slides 13 and 14. That same group of researchers I mentioned in an earlier video, Sugaya et al. 2019, reviewed data specifically on internet gaming disorder, as it's been termed. Again, this is not a disorder in the DSM yet. It was set aside for future study, but it's being called internet gaming disorder. So, and there are proposed criteria for it, as you know from the prior slide. So, most common symptoms in individuals who are said to have a form of internet gaming disorder is they have a need to escape life problems and emotions. 96% of samples indicate that escapism. They have preoccupation with wanting to be on the internet and playing the gaming online. 92%. 77% show tolerance as it's been defined, and 77% continue to use the internet for chronic online gaming despite harm in their lives in some form. So you can see that fits with some of the criteria that was proposed by the work group, the APA work group. Some studies have reported gaming time in adolescents who are said to meet the criteria for proposed internet gaming disorder was between 28 and 42 hours per week. Regarding the genre of game that individuals with internet gaming disorders seem to focus on, studies showed adolescents, so we're talking about below the age of 18, teens between around 12 and 18, adolescents with internet gaming disorder characteristics tend to play shooting action games, 96% studied. Massive multiplayer online games, 81% studied, compared with those who are just considered at risk or do not show problematic gaming criteria. They play different kinds of games and often single player games, not just multiplayer games. Severity of internet gaming disorder was predicted by the preferred genre of online game. So in other words, single player games versus massive multiplayer games. The massive multiplayer games, especially massive multiplayer role-playing games, and I talked about these in a previous slide and why that might be important for escapism. Those who engage in more of the multiplayer and the multiplayer role-playing games are more likely to display characteristics of internet gaming disorder than those who play single-player games and non-role-playing games. Those who play shooting games, for example, are more likely to show characteristics of internet gaming disorder than those who play strategy games that involve cognition and problem solving. The strongest predictors of internet gaming disorder characteristics was being involved in we're talking about tons of people, massive multiplayer online role-playing games and playing shooting games. Internet gaming disorder was reported to interfere with daily living in the people who were studied, the adolescents who were studied, including interfering with getting schoolwork done, causing truancy from school, which means they're either very late to school or they miss it altogether for days in a row or multiple times throughout a school year. And their grade point average and academic performance declined. Students with internet gaming disorder also report greater sleep disturbances than students without internet gaming disorder, meaning they're staying up all night playing games, and then they can't stay awake all day and they're exhausted and sleeping and missing school and so forth. If you look at slide number 14, there are some very pretty boxes in different shades of orange and tan. Even, I think, light purple and gray. Psychosocial features of those with internet gaming disorder compared to people who play online video games but are not meeting the criteria for so-called internet gaming disorder. These are what people who meet the criteria for the disorder tend to display. More severe emotional problems such as depression, anxiety, and other problems regulating negative emotions. Conduct disorder. So in the DSM, we have a conduct disorder category. This is for people who are still adolescents under the age of 18, and they have problems with confining themselves to rules, following rules. They get into fights, they transgress against people's boundaries, things like that. Other forms of antisocial behavior, things like that. More emotional symptoms, as I said, it might not rise to the level of depression and anxiety per se, but they get intense emotional reactions to things. Next, ADHD, hyperactivity with or without ADHD. Hyperactivity is what it sounds like. Person has difficulty controlling their levels of activity. They might be very loud. They might be very physically active and not be able to calm down. They don't, in classrooms, for example, they can't sit down and pay attention. They have to keep getting up, or they interrupt a lot. ADHD encompasses more than just hyperactivity. It's an attentional disorder where kids have difficulty controlling their attention, maintaining focus, concentrating, etc. They also show peer problems. They have problems in relationships with people their own age. They have conflict, things of that nature. They have higher levels of perceived stress. Perceived, meaning from their perspective, they feel that they have a lot of threatening, stressful experiences in their lives. Those who meet the criteria for internet gaming disorder show a higher percentage of those who don't, of self-injurious behavior, which is pretty straightforward what that means. They harm themselves in some form, could be cutting, things of that nature. They have difficulty concentrating, whether or not they meet the criteria for ADHD. Dysfunctional coping strategies, and that's interesting because it's been suggested that internet use that becomes compulsive and addictive in nature is a way to cope with problems in one's life. Studies indicate that individuals who meet the criteria for the proposed internet gaming disorder are not able to effectively cope with problems in their lives. Impulsivity, it's what it sounds like. People who meet the criteria for internet gaming disorder have a tendency to act on impulse without reflecting about consequences. They tend to meet the criteria for sensation-seeking personality. I don't have to say anything about that because you guys know a lot about sensation-seeking personality. We talked about it at length when we did our unit on personality and health. In addition, people who meet the criteria for proposed internet gaming disorder have maladaptive cognitions. So something about their thought pattern is problematic and dysfunctional. Things like they overvalue the rewards they get from the gaming environment, and their identity is too strongly influenced by their gaming behavior and how well they do online in their games. In addition, they have inflexible thinking and biases. They see the world dichotomously, either or. For example, people either like me or hate me. I'm either attractive or completely unattractive. I'm either smart or dumb. They don't have the ability to see things in shades of gray and to change the way they view things depending on context and circumstance, or even the idea that things could change in the future. They have an over-reliance on their gaming to enhance their feelings of self-worth and self-esteem. Their gaming behavior makes them feel better about themselves in ways that nothing else does, especially if they do well at a game or people think they're great at their gaming online. And finally, their thoughts about gaming as a method of getting social acceptance from peers. They over-rely on the gaming environment to have a feeling of social acceptance, social worth, things like that. Finally, people who meet the criteria for internet gaming disorder report more family conflict and very poor family cohesion, meaning the families are not very close. Okay? I'm going to stop there before we move on to the next video. Meet you there.